So the case study structure, while obviously being very flexible in order to bend to a particular format, it does generally conform to a rather specific formula. Usually the case studies I've written are somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 words. Because they're written primarily for an online audience, their writing style is a little different than perhaps more strictly quote unquote academic writing. Paragraphs will be shorter, sentences will be shorter, and you'll have more multimedia evidence of your claims that you can use to construct a well-rounded case study. So you can count on that the title page of the story map will feature your case study's title, your authorship information. It will credit Repair's graphic designer, Morgan Lacasse, and it will include a cover photo of one kind or another. Usually, our case study introduction formula involves opening with a kind of punchy block quote drawn usually from a primary source. It's designed to give readers the very basic contours of what the case study in question is about, and hopefully it will encourage them to continue reading more. I think of this as being kind of akin to a hook in a news story. You want the introduction to be attention grabbing. Next, we usually have a couple of purely descriptive sentences about the case study in question. It answers questions like, if it's a building, what's the address? Is it still extant? What function was it used for historically? And does it continue to serve that purpose today? Moving into the body of the text of the case study, we do usually divide our case studies into very discrete subsections. This is in part just due to the nature of writing for the web. It will also make the material more accessible, particularly to people using screen readers to navigate the content. Then we usually include an image slider that moves between a historic photograph of the site and a current or more current photograph of the site. We do that sometimes even if the site is no longer extant. And the image slider provides a neat way to show historic continuities or historic changes. We do have a ArcGIS component of our project that uses mapping. We are hoping to sort of catalog sites by theme or by location and then group them eventually on maps to hopefully make tailoring the collection of case studies to potential readers' interests easier and more streamlined. However, we are not to the point of really building out collections yet, but we do keep a map showing the specific case study site and the location toward the front of our case studies. Next, we usually have a section touching on the historic context necessary to understand the site. For example, a case study focused on John Eliot Square in Roxbury, Massachusetts, which is the most recent case study I've drafted, would not really make sense to a reader without a little historical context about who John Eliot is. And this historical context section isn't meant to be exhaustive or like a comprehensive research paper. Just ask yourself what information readers need to have to be able to really understand and appreciate your analysis of the site. Next, you can build on this historic context by making a few specific points about what insights your case study site brings to what particular questions. This is, I'd argue, the most flexible and least formulaic part about your case study that can be most shaped by what you find particularly interesting or what you would particularly like to research about your case study site. Then our case studies generally conclude by talking about future directions for the site. For example, in the case of Charles Thompson Memorial Hall, the Deaf Social Club in St. Paul, Minnesota, our conclusion talks more about the Save Thompson Hall Committee and links directly to their site where you can donate to their community-led preservation project. However, you could also conclude your case study by making recommendations for the site in terms of how they could make the content or the building itself more accessible to people with various disabilities, or how they could make the site's interpretation more inclusive and equitable. Finally, our website includes a footer that talks about our collective project of mapping disability histories, and it describes a little bit of the collective repairs mission. And if you'd like to contribute your case study to the collective project, you would be credited here as the author and compiler of this particular case study, as well as at the header. In terms of case study sources, the world is your oyster. This slide here includes examples of sources I've drawn on in the past, like newspaper clippings, historic photographs, interviews and oral histories, diary entries, my particular favorite, architectural renderings, plans and elevations, letters, current photographs of a historic site, recorded performances, newsreels, and historic film footage. And of course, these are just kind of jumping off points to provide food for thought in terms of the plethora of resources you have available to you as you create your case study. If you'd like to draw on other sources that are listed here in your case study, you are, of course, more than welcome to. So we obviously don't want to inadvertently create inaccessible case studies. So here are just a few points to bear in mind as you think over possibilities for your final project's case study. First, we're looking to make the website as broadly accessible as possible, which means trying to either avoid kind of jargony language entirely or provide plain language definitions. We're shooting for approximately an 11th grade reading level overall in the website. Sometimes this can be really difficult. I know that when a person has spent a lot of time in a field becoming familiar with the specialized terminology that is sort of ubiquitous to the field, it can be very difficult to know what is and is not comprehensible to an outsider to your field. And this is a place where I think having a wide variety of readers for your case study draft will really serve you well. Second, if you include videos in your case study, they should be captioned in some way, or a link to a transcript should be provided. This is best practice because subtitles will make videos more accessible to deaf and hard of hearing people, people with particular learning disabilities, people who aren't fluent in the spoken language within the video, and many other people. Image alt text is also a necessary accessibility measure. So alt text is what a screen reader will read aloud to people who navigate websites using screen readers to describe the content of an image. And I'll talk more about how to insert alt text into the story map template here in a moment. Image attributions are also crucial. Just like using in-text hyperlinks as citations, image attributions prevent copyright infringement or questions of potential plagiarism. And they also let readers of the site know where they could potentially look for more similar resources. Finally, using the tool in story maps to build in text headers and section breaks is really important because that's how you can ensure that folks using screen readers or other kinds of keyboard tabbing systems will access the information presented in the order in which you intended for your case study to be read, instead of receiving the information in a scrambled way. Here are a couple examples of continuity between case studies. Now, here are parallel title pages that feature the name of the site, a sentence-long description of the main point or theme of the case study, and authorship and designer information. On this slide, you can see how the case studies are specifically subdivided into clear sections that individuals can toggle between as they please. Here are a couple examples of how block quotes are formatted in story maps by Morgan, our team's graphic designer. And this slide shows what I mean by an image slider. So the historic image of the site in question goes to the left, and a current image of the site goes to the right. So for example, in the example here on the bottom right of Charles Thompson Memorial Hall, the slider, when you move between the historic image and the contemporary image, shows changes to the porch and the way the building is ornamented over time. This slide shows the very basic maps we're working with in ArcGIS. You can see here the relevant sites are marked with an icon, and these maps will likely become more complex as we build this project further. This slide shows examples of the kinds of sources you might work with to build out your case study. We have here on the left a gallery of images showing propaganda targeting women, telling them to enter the industrial workplace in the midst of World War II. And then on the newspaper clipping on the right here, documents Thompson Hall's opening. From these images, you can hopefully get a sense of how captions for media work in Story Map. So for example, the caption for the Gallery of Propaganda reads, "An intensive propaganda campaign encouraged women to join the war effort, promising that industrial work wouldn't compromise their femininity." So descriptions are intended to be very pithy, which can be challenging. This slide here shows the website's footer, which reads as follows. The Milwaukee Ordnance Plant is among a collection of sites being researched within a series of case studies titled Repair, Disability Heritage Collective. Repair stands for Rethinking Equity in Place-Based Activism, Interpretation, and Renewal. Download a copy of the case study here, or learn more about the project and explore the other sites here. Compiled by Sarah Pawlicki, and designed in collaboration with the Disability Justice and Conservation Initiative at the University of Minnesota. So of course you'd be credited here in the footer as a collaborator to the project if you so choose. So now let's move on to the very fundamental mechanics of putting together a case study within the story map template. So here, as this slide shows, I usually draft case studies in Google Docs and build in the structures I've already spoken of as I go. So here you can see there's a title, that's the name of the site, and then there's the block quote and the introduction. And I split up the case study in Google Docs using the heading/subheadings tool, which is available here under the normal text tab. And that makes pouring the case study into the story map template fairly easy. Now here we have again our template for a story map. Come here and add in an image. Oh, let's mix it up a little bit and use a different picture. Here we are. So this is where you'd enter where you got the source from, in this case, Flickr. And you come up here to properties to enter alt text. So for example, here, could say something like color photograph of Elliott Square showing a graveled walking path, benches around a circular seating area, and a sign explaining the site's historical significance. The square is full of trees and its perimeter is surrounded by a metal fence. All right. Now here, so this is a heading. You want to build in these headings for screen reader accessibility, and also just to make the order and structure of your case study very clear. So heading, subheading, paragraph, large paragraph, bulleted list, numbered list, and quote. You can drop text directly into the story map right from Google Docs, just like that. Thankfully, it carries over your in-text hyperlink citations as well. To add components to your case study, you click this little icon. It says add content block. And you have options to add in more text, a button, a section separator, a map like the ones I included in the slideshow, other images, an image gallery, which is essentially a collection of photographs sharing a single caption, a video with captions, please, an audio link. For example, we have in one of our story maps an audio clip of someone reading one of the block quotes from a contemporary newspaper article. You can embed a wide variety of online content directly into your case study. The swipe function is how you create the image sliders. Build in a timeline. And then we have these three immersive possibilities for how you arrange elements of your case study. For the slideshow, it says here, full screen, media focused layout with a minimal accompanying text. So I'd say that might be a really good option, for example, to really showcase an architectural elevation and show detail. Sidecar is an immersive block with stationary media panel and a scrolling narrative panel. And then the map tour is neat if you want to include a range of places and perhaps talk about the relationship between the places in question in a particular way. Now, let me see. Oh, I would also say, in terms of kind of final advice, for writing for a public audience as opposed to an audience primarily of specialists in your field, when you're writing for a specialist audience, they are all presumably familiar with kind of the ins and outs of your field, and you're being read by people who already know that they care deeply about your field and what you're saying. You often don't really need to sort of convince them to be interested because they already are. So writing for a public audience builds in the need to pique readers' curiosity and make them want to know more. And I think that is one of the most exciting elements of online writing and public facing writing more broadly.